The office was alive with its usual rhythm, the steady tap of heels against polished floors, the faint hum of computers, and the occasional burst of laughter echoing from glass-walled rooms where employees worked under the shadow of someone far more powerful than them. At the top of it all sat the CEO, a woman who had carved her empire with steel-edged determination. She carried herself like a queen in her fortress of glass and steel, a sharp figure wrapped in tailored suits, with eyes that missed nothing, and a voice that carried the weight of command. For her, power wasn't just a position, it was her armor. Everyone who worked beneath her knew it, feared it, and bowed to it. But in the background of that polished empire was a man most never saw, the janitor. He came in early, left late, always carrying an air of quiet exhaustion. His uniform was faded, his hands rough from years of work that no one respected, and his shoulders carried not just mops and buckets, but the invisible weight of fatherhood. He was a single dad, doing what he could to keep his little girl clothed, fed, and safe. No one asked his story. No one cared. To them, he was background noise, a fixture of the building, like the hum of the air conditioning or the cleaning carts that rolled down the hall. That day, the contrast between their worlds collided. The CEO was in the lobby surrounded by her staff and a few board members, her sharp voice cutting through the air as she scolded an assistant for misplacing documents. Her words were laced with impatience, but her eyes burned with something more, an endless need to assert dominance. The janitor passed by, carrying his mop and tools, his head down as though he could shrink from her gaze. But her eyes caught him, and something in the way he moved, quiet, invisible, ignited her cruelty. She wanted a laugh, a distraction, a way to entertain herself in front of her people, and so she called out. "You there," she said, her tone dripping with mockery. "Tell me, do you even know what real work looks like? Or do you just sweep floors?" The room quieted, a few smirks appearing among the staff. The janitor froze, glancing around like a deer caught in headlights. He didn't answer, not because he was dumb, but because he'd learned long ago that words could be twisted into more ridicule. Silence was his shield. The CEO smirked, her red lips curling. "I've got a challenge for you," she continued, walking closer, heels clicking against marble. "My car's engine won't start. Big, expensive car. Costs more than your salary for 5 years, I imagine. If you can fix it." She paused dramatically, the crowd leaning in. Then, with a laugh that cut like glass, she added, "I'll marry you." The employees erupted in laughter, the kind that bites into skin. To them, it was absurd. The idea of a powerful CEO marrying the janitor was unthinkable, laughable, a joke to lighten their dull day. The janitor felt the heat rising in his face, his grip tightening around the handle of his mop. He wanted to disappear, to shield himself from the laughter piercing his dignity. But then he looked up, just once, and in the corner of his mind he saw his daughter's face. The way she looked at him when she said, "You're my hero, Dad." That thought became the steel in his spine. The CEO tilted her head, expecting him to mumble or walk away, to accept his role as the butt of the joke. Instead, he set down the mop slowly, his movements steady, deliberate. The laughter quieted as he walked toward her, his eyes calm but burning with something unspoken. "Show me the car," he said, his voice low but clear enough to silence the room. The crowd murmured, some amused, some shocked at his boldness. The CEO arched a brow, intrigued by his sudden defiance. With a shrug, she led him and her entourage out to the parking lot, where her sleek luxury car sat gleaming under the afternoon sun. She crossed her arms, smirk firmly in place, and gestured toward it. "Go on then. Prove yourself. Or admit you're only good for sweeping floors." The janitor crouched by the hood, his rough hands moving with a confidence none of them expected. While others saw only grease and parts, he saw something familiar, something he had once known well. Years ago, before life had stripped him of dreams and titles, he had been a mechanic, skilled with engines, able to breathe life into dead machines. That past had been buried under hardship, under bills and responsibility, but it had not been erased. And now, in the glare of humiliation, he called upon it again. Minutes ticked by as he worked, the crowd whispering, some still chuckling, others beginning to doubt their own laughter. Sweat rolled down his brow, but his focus never wavered. Finally, he stepped back, wiped his hands on his faded uniform, and nodded toward the CEO. "Try it now." She slipped into the driver's seat with exaggerated flair, still expecting failure. But when she turned the key, the engine roared to life, smooth and powerful like a beast awakened. The sound cut through the parking lot, silencing every voice. Gasps replaced laughter. The CEO's smirk faltered, her eyes widening just slightly before she quickly masked it with a strained smile. She stepped out, heels clicking slower this time, as though her certainty had wavered. The janitor didn't gloat, didn't smile. He simply picked up his mop again, his dignity intact, his silence louder than any boast. The staff who had laughed earlier avoided his gaze now, their faces tinged with shame. He walked back toward the building, leaving the CEO standing beside her car, the engine purring like a reminder that her words had consequences. What had been meant as a joke had transformed into a test, and he had passed it with quiet strength. The CEO, for the first time in years, felt something she hadn't expected, the sting of humility. She had tried to strip him of dignity, but instead, he had stripped her of arrogance. And though no one said it aloud, everyone knew something had shifted that day. The balance of power was no longer as clear as it once seemed. The silence that followed the roar of the engine lingered in the air long after everyone had returned inside the building. The janitor went back to his cart, his hands still carrying the scent of grease and steel, his mind replaying the humiliation he had endured before, turning it into something powerful. Yet, as the echoes of laughter faded from his ears, another sound replaced it, the voice of his daughter. He could almost hear her soft giggle, the way she tugged on his sleeve when she wanted him to sit with her after a long day, and the way she told him he was the strongest man she knew. For her, he had kept standing when the world expected him to crumble. For her, he had refused to let the cruel joke define him. She was the reason he woke at dawn, the reason he pushed through exhaustion and swallowed pride. He had promised her that even though her mother was gone, she would never feel unloved, never feel abandoned. That promise was the fuel behind every step he took, every mop stroke, every weary night. At home, their apartment was small and worn, but inside it glowed with warmth. His daughter filled it with drawings taped to the walls and laughter that gave the dimly lit rooms life. Every evening after his shift, he would sit by her bed, reading stories until her eyelids fluttered shut, his voice carrying more love than the finest lullabies. He worked himself to the bone, not for recognition, but so she could have shoes that fit, school supplies, and the hope of a brighter future. Many didn't see him beyond the uniform and the mop, but his daughter saw everything. The strength, the sacrifice, the heart of a man who never stopped giving. What the CEO and her entourage had never known was that this janitor once carried dreams far larger than the broom in his hand. Years ago, he had been a skilled mechanic, a man who could breathe life into broken machines, who had once thought of opening his own shop. But life had stripped that dream away when tragedy struck. His wife's illness had drained every penny they had saved, every ounce of stability. When she passed, the bills remained, the debts suffocated him, and all he had left was the will to keep going for the sake of his daughter. He traded wrenches for mops, engines for floors, and dreams for survival. Yet the knowledge, the skill, the fire inside him never truly died. That day in the parking lot, when he leaned over the engine, those buried parts of himself resurfaced. He wasn't just proving a point to the CEO or the laughing employees, he was proving it to himself. The man who once knew how to build, fix, and create was still there, beneath the uniform and the quiet. The humiliation that had been forced upon him had awakened a truth he could no longer ignore. He was more than what they thought of him. He was a father, a fighter, and a man who refused to stay invisible. The CEO, despite herself, found her thoughts wandering back to him long after the crowd dispersed. Something about his silence, his refusal to gloat, unsettled her. Most men, faced with public mockery, would have either crumbled or barked back in anger. But he had remained steady, almost noble in his composure. His skill had exposed her arrogance, and his dignity had left her with a discomfort she didn't know how to shake. For the first time in years, she questioned whether her power had blinded her to the worth of those she looked down on. In the days that followed, whispers spread through the building. The story of the janitor who fixed the CEO's luxury car became a quiet legend among the staff. Some repeated it with humor, others with respect. But none could deny that their perception of him had shifted. The same employees who once dismissed him with sidelong glances now found themselves watching him with curiosity, even admiration. The janitor, however, paid little attention to their changed eyes. His focus remained where it always had, on earning enough to keep his daughter safe, fed, and loved. One evening after his shift, he returned home to find his daughter waiting eagerly with her backpack, waving a flyer in her hand. It was for a school science fair, and she wanted to build something special, something that would make him proud. She had scribbled a design for a tiny car powered by batteries, her handwriting uneven, but her excitement glowing brighter than any lamp in the room. He smiled, his heart swelling with pride, and promised her they would build it together. That night, the two of them sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by scraps of wire, cardboard and plastic, working side by side. She looked at him with wide, trusting eyes, and he realized that while the world mocked him, she saw him as the greatest man alive. Meanwhile, the CEO began noticing him in ways she hadn't before. She saw him in the hallways, quietly fixing broken lights, mopping the same marble floors she strode across in heels. She caught glimpses of the determination etched into his features, the quiet strength in the way he carried himself. She found herself remembering his words, the confidence with which he had asked her to show him the car. Beneath his rough uniform, she saw something she hadn't expected, an integrity that money couldn't buy. Her thoughts lingered longer than she wanted to admit, and slowly, against her will, respect began to take root. She had mocked him, tried to reduce him to a joke, yet he had risen with dignity, showing her a reflection of herself she wasn't proud of. It was a strange and humbling realization, one she kept hidden from those around her. But in her private thoughts, she began to wonder if the janitor had more to teach her about strength and resilience than the executives who surrounded her every day. For the janitor, however, none of this mattered. His life revolved around his daughter, around keeping the promises he had made to her mother on her deathbed, that their child would never go without love or guidance. Every laugh from his daughter, every small success she celebrated, was a victory greater than any recognition or wealth. While the world saw him as a man with a mop, he knew the truth. He was building something far more important than wealth or status. He was building a life of love, of sacrifice, of resilience. And in the end, that was the true strength no one could strip away.